Hey guys, and welcome to the Moms and Mysteries podcast, a true crime podcast featuring myself, Mandy, and my dear friend, Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Mandy. How are you?
I am doing well. How are you today, Melissa?
I'm good, but I say skip the pleasantries. Let's get right into it because
Let's
we
do
have the guest of our lifetimes, honestly,
100%.
here. Listen to any of our other guests, Gilbert. We've never said that about any of them. And I feel bad for anyone that comes on after this, but we have the man of the hour of the year, just the coolest guy in the entire world, Mr. Pulitzer Prize-winning Gilbert King.
How do I follow that? That's just too nice. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to have you here. And beyond just your Pulitzer Prize-winning work, you have created this incredible podcast, Bone Valley, that I spent much of 2022, I think it was, completely immersed in. All I talked was Leo. All I wanted to talk about was, somebody else did this. He never did this. I just wanted to talk about it all the time. Twitter was a buzz.
Oh.
It was everywhere. And it's so incredible to talk to you. And we just want to talk to you a little about the podcast for people who live under rocks and may not have heard of it or have listened to it just yet.
Right.
And, how it came to be.
Yeah. I could talk about it all day. And I just, there's something I have to say this, like, I love writing books, but this world was so different to me because most of the books I write are in the 40s and 50s and everybody's dead. And so all my research is just submerging in documents and case files. And this was something different because people were still alive and they were willing to talk to me. And, even going back to the 1980s, because they were teenagers when this happened.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the allure because, they're roughly like my age. I'm actually a little bit older than them, but like I was.
You didn't have to say
Yeah,
that.
I sometimes feel like talking to Leo, like he's been in prison for 36 years. I feel like, oh, he's some old guy now. And I'm like, I'm older than him.
Mm-hmm.
But, I actually went to college in Tampa. And it was right around this time when this was happening. So I used to go to concerts in Lakeland. They used to have a lot of big concerts at the Civic Center. And I just remember those days. And then that's the world I ended up going back into like 40 years later. Leo's a heavy metal guitarist and just, meeting with his friends and his family and just going over this, I guess it's like a strange time of Florida that, there's no cell phones. It's a different world that you're visiting, but everyone's still alive. Mostly. And so the access I had to everybody, I just fell in love with this universe. People were cooperating with all sides, the sheriffs, not so much the prosecutors, but the witnesses and everyone involved, including, Leo and Jeremy. And so the access I had on this was just something that I just, it took me years, but it was just so satisfying to be able to immerse myself in a story like this. And it's filled with sounds and voices. And it just, even though I'd never done a podcast before, we said this has to be a podcast.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You had never done a podcast and then knocked this one out of the park. Going into a second season, are you, second season's following up to Serial and stuff. Obviously, the first season was so huge, but this one is a continuation in the same world. Is there any anxiety about how this would come to be or how it would be perceived, I guess?
Yeah, there was a lot of anxiety. In fact, and it was from all different angles. And I can just tell you that, like, after I wrote my book, Devil in the Grove, which came out in 2012, my next idea was sort of sprung from that same universe. I found a different case in that county, and I ended up doing, another full book and had some of the overlapping characters. And it's just like 10 years later. And so, like, I was used to kind of doing this. And there's a lot that never made it into the first podcast. I mean, we had Jeremy's side and then Leo's side, and there's all these different cases. And we had so many different angles covered because it took so long. This idea sort of sprung from Jeremy's son reaching out to us. He listened to the podcast. He'd never heard his father's voice before, and he just wanted to talk. And I said, yeah, I'll talk to you. And we had no idea about a second season or anything like that. And as we were talking to him, I just felt like, wow, this is really interesting. This guy wants to meet his father. The father's not, he was told he was a monster. And so he had this interest in family connection from just hearing Jeremy's voice on the show. And so we sort of followed that. And, there were a lot of times where we just didn't think we could pull this off. It's like, where's the story going? It's not about a wrongful conviction. It's like submerging ourselves into Jeremy's family and Jeremy's life. And what is that going to look like? I mean, he's not somebody you're going to be sympathetic with at all, on the face of it. And so it was a real challenge to think, do we have enough? And, I can tell you this one strange thing is like, he was in solitary confinement for a long time and I only could correspond. And so like, well, I have all these letters from him that are really interesting, but I'm not doing a book here. I'm doing a podcast. I need voice. And then last summer, he just started calling me. He got moved and he started calling me twice a week. And I had all these phone calls. And sometimes we were just talking about mundane things like sports. And then other times he's helping me solve other murders that he committed. And, he felt like he gained something from the podcast. He felt like he was treated fairly in the podcast from what he'd heard. He felt like he'd done something good in his life, which I think is a really powerful thing. Like he thought,
Completely.
What can I do to maybe like make my life better? I'm never getting out. Maybe I can ease the suffering of the families of my victims. And so he made that choice. And I think he got rewarded for it. His son came out of the woodwork to meet with him and talk with him and correspond with him. And that was something like, I don't think I've ever heard him happier. Like he had given up on his son. He'd written to him when he was young and just was trying, but the son avoided him. And then this connection again, it's a really powerful part of the story.
I'm a premium subscriber, so I'm in the third episode now. So I got to hear a little of that today, and I recommend everyone becoming a subscriber. All of the episodes are there now from season 2, correct?
Yes, they're all, I think if you're a subscriber, they're all dropped. And I can't tell you how many people I heard from yesterday that just binged the entire thing, all 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And they got back to me like, when's the next one? I'm like, I just finished this. It's the day and you're done with it already. Like, it's just so.
Got to give you a break. Come on.
Yeah.
One thing I would love to know, because obviously the heart of the first season is Leo and his wrongful conviction. How has meeting and working with Leo Schofield changed you and how you perceive people and just in general, because he's truly amazing?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you may make me cry because I've never been more affected by a human being in my life. The first time we met him, he said to me, and we have it in the podcast, this is the story. You either believe it or you don't. It doesn't make it not true. I'm an innocent man, whether you believe me or not. And the way he said that, I've never heard anybody talk like that. And he was just like so transparent and said, look me up, go deep, do whatever you want. No matter what you come back, you'll never find a connection to me in that crime because I didn't do it. And he goes, I'll tell the same story from Sunday to Thursday backwards. I know what happened. I have no idea how my wife died. I was not there. And I'll be honest with you, I've sat with people who are killers, and I've sat with people who are innocent, and you can tell the way they talk. Leo is just, he's the heart of season 2. I mean, we took our cues from him because nobody in the story had any empathy for Jeremy except for Leo. Leo's the only one who cared about Jeremy. And, he said, he's part of my story. I want him treated with care too. And so it's just such a powerful thing to be in the presence of somebody like Leo. You're going through something you cannot imagine. Your wife is killed. That would be the most traumatic event of your life. And then you're blamed for it. And then you're incarcerated for 36 years for that crime. I don't think any of us can really relate to that. How do you survive that? How do you survive the bitterness and the anger? And I think it just makes you a different person. And in order to survive, Leo had to tap into some side of himself that would save him. And he did it. And it's infectious. I think the people that care about Leo, who believe in Leo and believe in his empathy and his forgiveness, I just think is such a powerful thing.
It is such a lesson in forgiveness because there's so many silly things that we get hung up on in life that it's, why would I forgive that person? You're looking at somebody, like you said, that's been in prison for 3 decades, and we're looking to him to say, okay, well, if you forgive him, then, I should have more empathy towards this person. So he's truly remarkable, and I'm very thankful you've brought him into our lives.
Yeah, and it's really, I think if you're on season or episode 3, you'll see there's something really beautiful happens. It's just, it all comes from Leo. Leo is a pastor in the Messianic community. He's like the lead pastor, great following. The prison staff loved him. The warden loved him. He had this like nonviolence thing that he had at the prison. And I think they were the least violent prison in the state of Florida, because he was like all about nonviolence. And he'd meet with the gang members and the leaders of the gang and said, we love you. We don't want this happening in our house. And that's how he kept violence down. He really put himself out there. And so like a lot of, getting back to your original question, like I was really following his lead. I was really worried because I was talking to Jeremy a lot, and I was finding compassion for him, even though obviously he should never get out of prison. He's too dangerous a person. We're not trying to get Jeremy out of prison, but you know, I don't think he can be rehabilitated and brought back into society. And I think Jeremy would say the same thing. But can he be redeemed? Can he do something with his life that eases the suffering and helps other people? And he wanted to help Leo, and that meant something to him. Doing the right thing meant something to him. And so that's what he did. And, I think that wouldn't have been possible without, Leo, just sort of setting the tone for that.
Yeah. I love that though he can't be rehabilitated, he could be redeemed. The possibility of redemption there, that's very powerful.
It is. And, I honestly, just by coincidence, 2 nights ago, I was doing a talk in Dayton, Ohio for the Ohio Innocence Project. It was me and Sister Helen Prejean, the author of Dead Man Walking, who, she's traveled down the same roads that I just started traveling down, like meeting with people who are killers. And what does that mean to his victims' families, And she talked a lot about that. Like, you have to care about everything. And if you can get the convicted murderer to apologize, and that sometimes means a lot to the family, because they don't really get true closure on this. But if they can find out that the perpetrator, the person who took someone they loved from their life, is genuinely sorry and wants to apologize, it gives them something to ease their suffering. And that's a big part of what Sister Helen does. And I was so inspired by her work. And then just to be like up on the stage with her, I just thought was just phenomenal. Like, I couldn't stop hugging her. And she was so funny too. Like, what a larger than life person.
Yeah, I am a little bit of a newcomer to this story, and still am working my way through the podcast. I've actually just finished the second episode of this new season today, and now you definitely will have me as a subscriber, because I left
you did it, Gilbert.
To that episode thinking I'm ready to go and hear the rest of this right now, immediately. This story is so, like we were saying, is so very complex, and I feel like just the many different conflicting emotions that it brings about is just truly unique. You don't see that in every case necessarily. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's such a fascinating story. But with, of course, all of the complexities of this case itself, it also kind of points out a lot of the complexities within the criminal justice system. So how did you approach just uncovering all the layers of this story without feeling overwhelmed by the weight of kind of everything, the injustices and all the emotion really behind everything?
Oh, that's such a great question. And, like I've always felt like my sole purpose in this was to expose state wrongdoing. Where did the wrongdoing happen? Because I became convinced very early on that Leo Schofield was innocent. And I'm not naive. I was handed a card by a judge at a convention that he was speaking at. And I turned the card over and it said, Leo Schofield, not just wrongfully convicted, he's an innocent man. And I'm thinking, like, judges aren't supposed to do that. Like, there's a code of ethics. They're not supposed to criticize the state's, criminal justice system. And he was doing that. And, I ended up calling him, and he said to me, Leo Schofield was framed. I could tell you exactly how they did it. And he did. And I started looking into it, and I spent a lot of time, reading the transcripts, and I became, after meeting Leo especially, I became absolutely convinced of his innocence. This was like 6-something years ago. I've been on this case for 6 years. The prosecutor has never been on this case for 6 years. Leo's defense has never been on this case for 6 years. I tracked down everything. And what I ended up finding, and cases are all different. Sometimes prosecutors make mistakes. Sometimes they get tunnel vision, and when they just look at certain things because they want it. This was a case where the prosecutor actually made conscious choices to deceive. And I find that abhorrent. I mentioned this the other day, and it's worth repeating. Sometimes I ask the prosecutors to comment on this. Like, I want to ask you some questions. Why did you make these choices? And they don't want to talk to me. And their answer is sort of always like, Well, we try our cases in the court of law, not the court of public opinion, as if, the court of law has more integrity and more value. And I'm sorry, that's not true. There's a lot that is not admissible, so you don't get the whole story. The truth is not something that just comes in courtrooms and in verdicts. And I feel like we looked at everything. I've been looking at this case for 6 years. Nothing I've ever found has come back and said, oh, that could be Leo. Every time I find something new, it points to Jeremy Scott. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind about this case. And just to understand that, you know, let's just say I deceive people in my work, or I withhold some documents. Like, you have these happen in criminal cases all the time where somebody else confesses and the prosecutor hides it. And it's called a Brady violation. And, you know, and what happens in that? What's the worst thing that happens to a prosecutor? The case gets overturned by a higher appellate court and they write the prosecutor erred by withholding exculpatory evidence. And then the prosecutor goes on and does another case. If I withheld documents, like let's just say Leo confessed to me and in a letter and I said, oh, I got to hide that. That doesn't help my story.
Right.
And I got caught. My books would be pulled from the shelves. So I have more accountability than these prosecutors do. And, that's what I think is a problem. And that's what I try to write about. Like, these were conscious choices to ruin a man's life. This prosecutor knew exactly what he was doing. And he presented a case that was designed to just put Leo Schofield away, not to get true justice. And even after the conviction, he started messing around with Jeremy Scott. And so he's done a lot of things that I find absolutely abhorrent. I've talked to other prosecutors. They say this man should have been fired immediately for doing that. That's beyond unethical. And he's passed away. So it's a little bit, I don't know what to say about it. I'm not trying to smear him. I would be saying this if he was alive too.
So with as emotionally charged as this case is, and I agree that it really, I feel like I can't imagine being the one looking into all of this and kind of bearing the weight of all these things, realizing all these injustices. There's so much that is genuinely upsetting in this case. Was there a moment in the process of making the podcast, whether it was recording or researching, where you felt like you were just you're emotionally drained? You just don't know if you can do this anymore? Or was there a time that maybe you felt like inspired and you thought, I'm definitely on the right path doing this. We're going all in for sure.
Yeah, I think like I get asked a question about that, like self-care. Like people ask me, and it's always younger people who ask me this. Like for older people, we don't think about this. And I didn't really either. Like self-care is like a martini. I don't know. Like that's but like it's definitely like you're around a lot of trauma and a lot of pain, and in a way you sort of feel like you're absorbing a lot of this yourself. I talked to Isabel Wilkerson, who's a writer I really admire. She wrote her recent book is called Cass, but before that, she wrote a book called The Warmth of Other Suns. And, she's just reporting on Black migration and trauma. And, I asked her because I was curious. I was moderating a panel like this. And I said, I'm going to ask her now because everyone asked me.
Right.
I said, what do you do for self-care? Like, how do you manage this? Because you're exposed to so much of this pain and trauma. And I steal her answer now. Basically, she says it's a privilege and an honor to be able to go and help people who maybe don't have the voice to speak out about this thing, and be able to voice something and take their stories and make them mean something. And I do see that as an honor. Like I feel really grateful for Leo to allow me to this, but I also feel grateful to Jeremy and all the people who've spoken to me. And I try to honor that in a way that's truthful and empathic to them. And I think when you get to the end of season 2, it's transformative in a lot of ways. I really do believe that it's, you're going to feel things that you haven't really felt before in a true crime podcast. I can guarantee you that. And it's really because we're honoring the people who are involved and being true to who they are. And, Jeremy too is somebody you're going to feel something about him when you get to the end of this. And I think it just goes back to like honoring people's humanity. Like Jeremy's son comes to the conclusion that, like he's not defined by the worst things he's done. He's still a family member. He's still my dad, and he deserves a chance to be that dad. And I was ignoring him for all these years because I just thought he was a monster. And he, in a sense, he's a killer, and he's never getting out of prison. But getting back to your point, can he be redeemed in some way? And I think the answer is obviously yes.
What was the most challenging part about telling a story that really spans decades, and especially when there's been so many kind of roadblocks and false starts and just not really sure what direction it was going?
I don't really, the challenge of it was, I'll tell you, this is probably the best answer. When we started this project, I thought maybe I was going to write like a feature article about this case, um, maybe take 6 months or something like that and do it. But the more I was reporting, the more I realized that all these voices are incredible. First of all, Leo is such a great storyteller and a great speaker. And so having a microphone in front of his face, I'm like, people need to hear him. I don't think I can do it justice by just doing print. And so that was like challenge. I didn't know how to do a podcast. So what do? We started recording everything. And, you learn on the job. Like my first couple interviews were terrible because I'm just going, yeah, and speaking through everything. I didn't really realize you got to shut up sometimes and listen and nod at people, So I had to learn that. And it actually made me a better interviewer, I think, because I was, the rhythm changed of the conversations, and letting people talk was where a lot was coming from. I think the whole challenge all along was like trying to wrap ourselves around this big sprawling case that sprawls for decades. It's appeal loss after appeal loss when you just can't even imagine. At one point, Jeremy Scott comes into court and confesses and admits to it. And they just basically say he's got no credibility because he's a liar. And they don't investigate. They don't try to separate what might be true, what might be false. They take the easy route. Oh, well, he did say that, he would confess to anything for $1,000. Well, he's never done that before. And when he did confess, he didn't get a cent. So you can say that and make it sound like he's not credible. But when he confessed, he didn't ask for anything and he did it for free. So, let's look at the truth instead of just throwing these statements out there to dismiss his credibility.
Yeah. Were you as terrified as I was earlier this year to hear that Leo had been in an accident? Because I thought my stomach was going to fall out of my body. I could not believe what I was hearing.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like, this man is like just got out of prison like that same year. And, to suffer a serious, severe motorcycle accident where now, his body is really banged up pretty bad. You just feel like, what more can this man take? Like, is there anything else that can be thrown at him? And, to be honest with you, I know Leo, like if there's one person who can get through something, it's going to be him. And he's in a lot of pain still to this day. He doesn't have, he can't walk yet. He's still in a wheelchair. He hasn't even started rehab because his pelvis was so smashed that he had to just do bed rest and not bear any weight on it for 3 months. So that 3 months is almost over and he'll start rehab. But he's got some real challenges ahead of him. And yeah, so I was really devastated. I just felt like this is just not fair that it's him, like he's trying to get his life back on track with the time he has left on this earth and then to go through something like this. But, again, it sort of brings it back to who he is as a person and he's going to be an amazing speaker at some point when he gets back on his feet.
As the weather starts heating up, I find myself inside more. And if we're being honest, the last thing I want to do is have a stinky litter box that makes my home feel even hotter. And with the temperature rising, the last thing I need is an odor taking over the space I'm actually trying to cool down. And that's where Pretty Litter comes in. Its non-clumping formula traps odors and moisture, keeping everything fresh and absorbent without weighing me down. One 6-pound bag actually lasts a month, so I'm not dealing with heavy litter bags in all this heat. But what really gives me peace of mind is how Pretty Litter changes color to alert me to potential issues in my cat Luna. It helps me catch things like urinary tract infections or kidney problems before they become bigger issues. And since Pretty Litter ships straight to my door, I don't even have to leave the house to restock it. Pretty Litter makes keeping my house fresh this summer a lot easier. Indoor cats and indoor humans agree. Pretty Litter helps my house smell fresh and clean. Go to prettylitter.com/moms to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. That's prettylitter.com/moms to save 20% on your first order and get a free cat toy. prettylitter.com/moms. Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. Getting kids to eat their greens can be a real challenge. Like, randomly, my son would eat broccoli for several months, and then all of a sudden, he hates it. And greens in general now are like a 4-letter word in my house. But that's why I love Haya. Unlike most kids' vitamins, they're not loaded with sugar and additives. Haya gives my kids all the nutrients they need without the junk. So there's no sugar, just a tasty, healthy vitamin that they actually like. Haya is packed with 12 organic fruits and veggies, plus 15 essential vitamins and minerals like vitamin D, B12, C, and zinc to support everything from their immune system to their mood and bones. It's also non-GMO, vegan, and allergy-free, so I don't have to worry about anything harmful. And if your kids are picky about their greens, raise your hand. Me too. Haya has Kids Daily Greens and Superfoods. It's a chocolate-flavored greens powder with over 55 whole food ingredients. You just scoop it, shake it, and sip it with milk or any non-dairy drink. It's a nutritious boost my son actually enjoys. Plus, each batch is third-party tested for safety, so I can trust Haya. They even send it straight to my door, helping me live out my dreams of never leaving my house. And with the first bottle, we got some stickers, and of course, my son enjoyed putting the stickers all over it. If you're done with the veggie struggle, Haya makes it easy and delicious. We've worked out a special deal with Haya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hayahealth.com/moms. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hayahealth.com/moms and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. You were talking about Judge Cupp, I believe, earlier, and, I'm sure you heard this guy's innocent. I promise I have this guy who's innocent, claiming he's innocent. Judge Cupp ends up believing it. But were there other law enforcement professionals who had a change of heart after you've presented them with all of this information pointing to Jeremy's confession? Were there any professionals that participated in the case that came to a different conclusion that could look at it and say we were wrong?
Sort of. I'll give you an example. The people involved in Leo's case are pretty buttoned down, and they're on a little island where they're just saying the courts have spoken, the jury's spoken. That's going to be their line, and don't trust a podcast. That kind of thing. I'll just tell you my experience, and I won't name any names, but I go out and talk to a lot of prosecutors in the state of Florida. I've talked to a lot of professors. None of them believe that Leo is guilty when they look at the documents and they look at the things I share with them. So yeah, in terms of the case in the second season, I think when you get to episode 4, you'll see we go back and look at the cab driver case from the first season, but in a different way. And it's mostly because people heard the podcast and reached out to me. And so the sheriff's department wouldn't talk to me. They just closed me off. But the lead detective involved in the case is the one that reached out to me. He's retired. And so I want to talk to him. And I showed him all the evidence. I was trying to show that I think Jeremy did this. You went after the wrong guy. It's a little bit complicated because he was investigated for possibly getting witnesses to lie. And so it was a little tricky. But at the end of it, he did say, Jeremy should be a suspect in this. And, he did admit that for the first time. And so there's that. But I promise you in this, I bet if you went into the prosecutor's office, it's my guess, I bet you'd find a lot of people who will never say it out loud, but they know that Leo's innocent. And the same with the police and sheriffs. I've talked to deputies from, the area, and they're like, I listen to that podcast. That guy's definitely innocent.
Unbelievable. We're going to move into season 2, really, but I wanted to know, as you are such an accomplished journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner, I'm going to say it again because you haven't even said it once. Where does seeing Leo walk out of prison fall on your list of happiest moments in your career?
I've only had a couple really happy moments in my career. I say this, just it sounds, but it's true. Literary awards are great, but this is something completely different. I wrote a book, Devil in the Grove, in 2012, and the response to that was so powerful that the governor ended up pardoning them, recommending the case be reopened. And then I got to go to the exoneration where I was sitting in court with the family members and basically heard them say, on behalf of the state of Florida, we apologize. These were wrongful convictions, wrongful accusations. All the charges are dismissed. that's what meant everything to the family because they were carrying this. And so to hug those families afterwards, like they knew all along that this wasn't true, but like it takes a story to come out. And it just sort of reinforces the power of storytelling. It's the
Yeah.
one thing like Leo has no legal recourses. There's nowhere to go for him, but a story might be able to be the thing that gets him exonerated. So when he walked out, he made it very clear, like this was never going to happen unless the story came out, that it had to be a story. And I remember I had a conversation with him and I said, Leo, you know, he had to wait 5 years in prison while I worked on this. Like if you don't feel some guilt about that, like it just took that long to do this investigation. That's how
Yeah.
long my books take. It's 5 years. And, he knew he wasn't going anywhere. And I said to him, look, I don't know if this is going to make any difference, but I promise you I'm going to change the narrative of your case. That I know I'm going to change because they had it wrong. And, he was like, that's all I really want. I want people to know. But to see that, he says like, if this podcast didn't come out, I don't think I ever would have been paroled. Like they would have just kept doubling down on what they'd done
Right.
and done it in the dark where nobody cares, nobody sees it. This time they had cameras out there. They're getting all this media attention. That's what changed his life. And, he knows that. And it's just the most satisfying thing. It just compounds the tragedy of watching, or seeing 36 years in prison and just knowing that like, this is the worst thing, for somebody to be accused of murder. You can't even grieve wife because you're on the
Right.
defense immediately. And everything that went wrong in his trial and investigations, so painful.
Yeah.
So in season 2, you kind of take a new turn and it's focusing on Jeremy Scott. So what has been the difference in how you approached this season versus how you handled season 1?
It just sort of, season 2 was not planned. We didn't have a case that we wanted to go after. It just sort of developed from people coming out of the woodwork, people hearing the podcast the first season and saying, all right, I want to talk now. I have something to tell. And they contacted me, and it was all these people started reaching out to me saying, I have more to tell you. And so by following up with them, because you're never done with these stories. I mean, I feel like anything new comes in, I want to know about it. And so I'm on this still. But like once like Justin, Jeremy's son, came out and just said, I want to know about my father. And there was another angle because his mother, Jamie, was Jeremy's girlfriend at the time of these murders. And so she knew everything. We tried to talk to her. She almost came to lunch and then she canceled at the last second. She didn't cancel, she just didn't show up.
Mhm.
Just got nerves and didn't want to do this. And she kind of knew what she would be talking about. And it's not easy, right? So I just started talking to her. Justin sort of said, I think you should talk to him. And so, Jamie's whole story was that she had a lot to say and Justin had a lot of questions, but she didn't feel comfortable telling them in person. So she kind of agreed, like, well, I'll tell him through you and then you tell him.
Mhm.
And that's how we did it. And then, Justin got to listen to his mom's voice and hear things that he'd never heard before. And we were sort of like the bridge relaying this. And that just felt like an interesting angle to pursue. And then, once Jeremy started calling me and we were having conversations twice a week, I started to see a story develop. But, again, think about it. If you're like trying to put together a podcast, like, where's your case? And we're going to like go into the life of the killer this time.
Yeah.
It's not really done that often. And it
Yeah.
was challenging to just come up with a concept,
But you gave Jeremy, like, we got to learn enough about his past and just the horrific way he grew up that my heart went out to him. Even knowing he, was convicted of doing all this stuff, there's still this soft spot that knows, I'm a mom, that knows, like, that's somebody's kid. And, at one time he's just this innocent baby. And this thing he's done isn't everything. As you were talking about, he may be a monster, but he's still a person and he's still, had this life that was very much affected by the things going around him. So thinking of him being in prison by himself, not getting letters, no one's reaching out to him, he has nothing on commissary. It's hard to imagine.
yeah, it really is. And, I've had prosecutors, like hard-nosed prosecutors, tell me, like, I didn't think I'd ever have any sympathy for that kid. I mean, but I do. I mean, and it's not like you're trying to tug at the heartstrings or, do anything manipulative. We all agree that he is too dangerous a person to be out in society. He can't be rehabilitated. He's just impulsive. He's got, He's got brain damage from an accident. All of it's horrible. His whole life was, he was in a life of crime at the age of 9 and homeless and living on the streets. That you can't imagine like that. Like, of
Mhm.
course, bad things are going to happen. And that's exactly what his life became. But, you know, I remember Jamie said, like, he did have a sweet side. He could be a good person at time. He wasn't a monster. And she recognized that. And, it was just interesting to hear from Justin because, he was told, like, you're not your father. Like, he was worried about that.
Yeah.
And you're not your father. And then Jamie finally said to him, like, he is his father, but he's the good side of Jeremy.
Mm.
And I started to see the good side of Jeremy when I started talking to him, when I saw how much he wanted to connect with family, the remorse he felt, all the remorse that the state was looking for Leo Schofield because he couldn't show remorse. They said, you got to keep him up because he's never apologized. He's never said he's sorry for what he done. Well, he's claiming to be innocent. That's why he hasn't done that. All the remorse is right there with Jeremy. Jeremy, I can't tell you how many times he's cried in front of me, like speaking about this. He gets very emotional about it. And it's just like when you see that, and what more can you ask from somebody who's convicted and never getting out of prison? The only thing you can ask of them is maybe ease the suffering of the families of the victims by doing the right thing, seeing that Leo Schofield is not held accountable for a murder that he committed, and then maybe easing the family's suffering by saying, these are things I did. If you're wondering about this, I'm the guy.
Yeah.
So did you take a little bit of a different approach then working with Jeremy just because of the differences? Of course, in season 1, you're working with someone who, you came to believe is innocent, and now you're working with the potential perpetrator of the crime. So that's, of course, two very different dynamics. Did that affect the way you approached him and the facts, around his involvement?
Yeah. There was an interesting moment where, like if you follow like these kind of cases, you often see that the people, even if they're confessed killers, they have a very difficult time talking about the moment. They'll sometimes lead you right up to it. Like, I got in with the gas station. She gave me a ride. We drove back here. They'll give you all the details. Then it's like, I lost it. And then here's what I did with the body. And here's what I did next. And that. And they don't want to talk about that because think about it, the trauma that you're exposing. You don't want to believe you're the kind of person who would do that. And so I've heard judges say it before, like, you never get that moment from them because it's just too painful for them to recount, even when they're confessing. And so there was a moment where I was investigating this one case that Jeremy confessed to. And I just had to say to him, I need you to give me that moment. I need you to go there for me and give me all this detail. I need everything. And he wrote me back, and it's in the episode 4. He wrote me this letter. He goes, all right, Mr. King, I'm going to tell you the whole story. I want you to know that I could be charged with this murder, but that's okay. Here's what
Mm.
happened. And he wrote a 6-page detailed letter, everything. He drew a map that's like absolutely correct, beyond what the police could draw. All his movements, where he went, what he did, the witnesses he recognized that he saw, it was all there. And he went there for me. And I'm deeply appreciative of that. And he said, this is all true. And I could confirm just about everything that he said. And, when I brought it back to the lead detective, he's like, all right, that guy should be a suspect. And so that was the approach, is like, you're asking somebody to recount. Whereas, you asked Leo, he was like, I don't know where she was. I wasn't there. I can tell you about my search. But now I'm going to the guy who did it, and he can fill in the blanks and details. And so, that's a responsibility. You have to build up trust. I think it's a way of talking to people sometimes, like, I've never asked Leo if he killed his wife. Like, that's a not interesting question. It doesn't lead you anywhere. Tell me everything is a better question, and go through it a million times. Like, that's how you get to it. You start learning the details. When you confront somebody like that, it's sort of like a TV moment, I think, where like, oh, he looked to the side when he said that. So it brings in all this behavioral stuff. It's like, it's not a really helpful thing. So I never really asked Jeremy those kind of hard questions. I would just say, do you want to talk about it? And, sometimes he would. And sometimes he was agitated about other things. And we talk about, getting pepper sprayed in prison or something like that. But, there were times where he was in a good mood and he was willing to help. And I just sort of let him talk. And it was just really a lot of listening.
Yeah. One of the things that jumped out to me, and I'm sure to everyone in that first episode of the second season, is hearing Jeremy say he owes his life to Leo. If his dad hadn't, I think the words he used was taken the fall
Yeah.
for. If Leo hadn't taken the fall for his dad, then Justin would never be here. And just the realization of like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine. That's got to be a conflict inside you as well, knowing that this guy has spent this time in prison, but to be grateful, I don't know. It just was like a mind-blowing moment I would have never put together. And
It was
obviously
to
that's something he's lived with.
Yeah, it was to me too. Like I just never thought about that. Like, and he feels guilt about that. And I was kind of like overwhelmed. And, a couple weeks ago, I gave Leo that episode. And, like he goes, Gilbert, I got to hug that guy. I was crying listening to that. Like he should not feel any guilt about this. I'm like, I got to meet him.
Oh,
And that's the kind of person
oh
Leo
my gosh.
is. And, that's who Leo is. And, and Justin just wants to meet Leo. Like he feels so bad about everything. And, he's emotional about it too. And I think that's what I really love about this story. Like everybody's just so full of emotion, and so like raw. And it became me too. Like I was getting really moved by this stuff, like being in the middle of this. I can't tell you how many times Leo has made me cry just talking to him. Like it's just, you're exposed to something, a thought that like is like, it's Gandhi-esque, like so Mahatma Gandhi is this kind of like, I've lived through this, or, Nelson Mandela kind of stuff. Like you have to be a special person to survive this and to have this kind of attitude where you're the only one who has any empathy for the guy who actually killed your wife. Like if nobody else cares about him. And it just reminds you like, I'm around somebody really special, and I absorb as much as I can because he does change your life in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
Scott Cupp will tell you the same thing. And Scott Cupp's a bigger crybaby than I am. Sorry, Scott.
You don't have to throw anybody under the bus, but if you're going to, I guess.
We make no apologies.
With your focus being on Jeremy in this season, what do you hope people get from this season? As you said, he's never going to get out. This isn't about wrongful conviction. What do you hope people leave from when they finish this season?
I just hope it exposes them to a side of humanity and a more deeper look that's not just black and white. There's some gray areas in there. I like to write about the gray areas and what that just really interests me. Like there's more to this story. And so by just going so deep into this one, I'm really not trying to like manipulate people's emotions, but it's just, that is the story. There's people feel these things really deeply. And everybody we talk to has been deeply affected by Jeremy's violence. It ripples out. There's people who spent time in jail because of his crimes. Leo and also another man who got accused of a crime that Jeremy committed. He was on trial for his life twice, facing the electric chair. And we talked to him, and I think it's just like, you're exposed to these people who have lived these horrors, and how do they survive it? How did they get through it? Just talking to Jamie and Justin, and you're exposed to a side that you don't normally get in a criminal investigation or hearing. I don't know if you guys saw a show. I just saw this fairly recent, Adolescence on Netflix.
I've heard about it, but haven't watched it yet.
Well, it's phenomenal, but it shows you that other side. And it was so new to me on television because you're going into another side. It's not the traditional good guys, bad guys kind of thing. You're going deep into the other side, and there's levels of humanity that you see that you've never seen anywhere before on television. And I kind of feel like we were doing a very similar thing. We're going down this road, and by the time they get to the end, nobody wonders why you did it. It's like, why didn't somebody do this? And I felt like that was the great takeaway from season 2. Like, it's a very different story, but it's still within that kind of Bone Valley universe, and some of the characters overlap, but you're seeing a different side this time.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was just fascinating to explore.
I agree. I love it.
I read the New York Times article that just came out yesterday that was amazing, of course, but there was this conversation they mentioned between Leo and Jeremy, and I'm not there yet in the podcast, but the thing I read about it, am I allowed to say this?
Yeah, there's no spoilers.
Okay. But the thing that I took from that was that you were there in that moment and were able to facilitate that. What was that? What was that like? That's like, you can't even script something like that.
No, you really can't. And, like, I think if you were to plan this. Like Jeremy has written me a letter and said, I someday hope to sit down face to face with Leo and tell him I'm sorry for what I did to Michelle. Like he'd made that clear. And and Leo, had a desire to do it, but like, how do you put something like that together? Jeremy's in solitary confinement again. Leo's been in a motorcycle crash. That's not going to happen, right? But if it was to happen, I think it would be something like it would be really scripted. You'd be like, Leo, you're about to meet the man who
Mhm.
and you know what it would look like.
Mhm.
And ours looks nothing like that because it happens spontaneously. It's messy. They're talking over each other at times. And
Mhm.
yet you get to these kernels of truth and you get to those moments anyway. And you just feel it so raw and so spontaneous that it has even more power than if you tried to set it up and make it happen and be there to record it. And so that's sort of what I feel like our whole podcast has been about, is just keeping the mics on and talking to people, and things happen. I think sometimes, I'm a big fan of Brian Stevenson. He wrote Just Mercy, and he does a lot of this kind of work. And his big thing is, if you really want to learn about injustice, you have to be proximate. You have to be on the ground to the people who have experienced injustice. And I think that's where we were. And it was coincidental that Jeremy happened to call me at the time I was visiting Leo. And
Mhm.
I was like, oh, this is a moment. It wasn't scripted. We had no idea that Jeremy would call. I never know when he's going to call me. I
Mhm.
can't call him. And then it happened. And, it just sort of fell into place because I knew who Jeremy was at that point. I knew how he felt, and I knew where Leo felt. But as Leo says, and I won't ruin it because people will want to hear it, but
Yeah, I do want to hear it. Mhm.
yeah, but you can imagine there's even a moment where like the phone call ended and I hung up, but I didn't realize that I was still recording. And you
Mhm.
catch a little bit of me and Leo talking, the reaction about that. And then because Jeremy was in a public place at a kiosk around inmates, he was a little more guarded than I think he would normally be.
Mhm.
But he called me later and we had a conversation about how did that feel? And I think that was even more revealing
Mhm.
and more emotional in a lot of ways. So I won't ruin it to you, but you just have to hear it because it sort of stays true to the whole story, even going back to season one. Like this is what happened. We know it. And these guys have arrived at the truth. Maybe the state of Florida hasn't, but these guys have. And like I said earlier on, you're not guaranteed the truth in a courtroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think the state of Florida has not charged him with her murder, even though, we have fingerprints in Michelle's car, we now have his confession, and a million other little pieces to this puzzle? Do you think they just haven't done it because in order to do that, they would have to then admit that Leo did not kill his wife?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think there's a lot of like machinations that were happening at the time that made it even worse. So the prosecutor, John Aguero, who prosecuted Leo Schofield a couple of years later, 2 years, not even 2 years later, he prosecuted Jeremy Scott and put him away.
Mm.
So, Jeremy's story is like, he knew I did it. I told him I did it, and he didn't want to hear it. He wanted me to stick to the story about stealing stereos. That's why my fingerprints were found in the car. He said, stick to that. I'll help you with parole. And like, when you're in prison for life, you'll
Mhm.
do anything. And so, granted, I think that really did happen. He met with Jeremy alone with no witnesses, no tape recorder, and put a deal in place. And so that's what complicated things. And it made the whole appellate process kind of tainted at that point because Jeremy originally got up there and stuck to the story thinking he might get a deal and denied killing Michelle. And then when he didn't get the help, he said, I'm telling the truth. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a big part of it. I think today, having to admit you're wrong, maybe having to go back and look at that prosecutor and see some of the other cases that he was involved in, it opens up a can of beans or can of worms, or whatever you want to call it. And it's also this finality that I think the system sometimes clings to, is like, we don't want to be revisiting things because some story came out. The jury is what spoke. And maybe the story comes out and shows somebody's innocent, but that's just part of the system now. Okay. And I think that finality is just something that, is a horrific impediment to wrongful convictions, because every single wrongful conviction has a jury that convicted and an appellate court that upheld it. And you can just hide behind that the rest of your days, but you're not getting closer to the truth all the time.
Yeah. Will there be a Bone Valley 3, season 3?
I mean, I'll give you the same answer I gave after one. I have no idea. And
Okay.
if I do, like my thinking now is like, I love working in Florida. I love the people I've met. I get help from all sides, law enforcement, judges. Um, People tend to just like consuming the stories I write, and they kind of know that I'm going to put myself into it and tell it right. And so I get help from all different areas. And I'm so grateful for that. The connections I have down there, I have people coming to me with stories all the time. And, I have other stories that have come to me that I've started to look into. I will tell you, there is going to be some bonus episodes coming, probably this summer. Inside that Bone Valley universe, a completely different thing, but, Leo's involved again. And I think that would be something we've been looking into it. It's a really good case about somebody who's innocent, happens to be Leo's cellmate. And you think, what are the
Whoa.
odds? Yeah. What are the odds of that happening? But, what brought them together was that they were both wrongfully convicted and they became best friends. So we're exploring that too. So yeah, there's some really interesting cases out there. And I'm sure there will be a Bone Valley 3. I don't know exactly what it'll be, but I can tell you we're looking into some things.
Wow. Before we go, we do want to play a little Florida Man game with you since you are a fan of Florida. You are our sunshine sage.
And you know that we are from Florida as well, right?
I did not know that. Where?
Did we not say that?
We live in Central Florida.
You're
So that's
kidding me.
the whole thing. We're like
Nobody told me that.
Lakeland, yeah, all of that stuff. We're in Central Florida. We're like Orlando
You're in Lakeland
area. No, we're
We're in the Orlando area.
Oh,
yeah. So that actually makes listening to the podcast that much more fascinating and learning about the story that much more fascinating because I am very familiar with a lot of the places that are mentioned in the podcast. And so it's very easy to visualize things that, are being talked about in the story.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I thought you might appreciate it because it's like going back to the 80s and it's an era that's just so kind of fascinating to me visually and sound wise. And, and then I'll ask you guys, have you ever heard of the area called Bone Valley before?
I had not. I was actually really surprised when I started the podcast that I was like, why? What is this thing? I've never heard of it. Yeah.
And I spent a ton of time in Central Florida. Like, my last couple of books were based, right around Orlando. And like, I never heard of Bone Valley before as this area. And a lot of Floridians tell me I've never heard that before. But that's what's great about Florida. There's stuff out there you never know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Polk County is like its own little world as opposed to the rest of the state. But it's if you say something happened in Polk County, it's a different picture.
Everyone's like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah.
Well, yes, it's so funny you say that because I did 2 stories in Lake County. And I was like, oh, okay, how bad can it be? Like I went through Lake County and then you go, oh, I guess it can be pretty bad.
Yeah. Okay, so I just have 5 quick true-false questions, Florida Man style. So the first one is, a Florida man attempted to rob a bank using a live alligator as a weapon. Is that true or false?
I know. I saw a video of a man did that at a convenience store, taking an alligator in there, but I don't know. I got to say true. It's got to have it.
It's true. Back in 2018, a man used I guess this was more than once. This was at a bank that this happened. He tried to use a live alligator, demanding money, or he threatened to release the alligator. So
the same guy did the same trick more than once. He took an alligator.
Maybe, I don't know. Or there's 2 separate people, which I think is more upsetting.
Yeah. It is.
Second question is, Florida man was arrested for riding a bicycle through a Walmart while dressed as Spider-Man. I'm happy he had clothes on, but is that true or false?
I'm going to say false on that one. I don't know why.
Okay. I'm sorry to tell you, you've lost that one. It's true. Yeah, he was arrested, caused a scene. I think it's probably because he was wearing clothes. That's probably what tripped me there.
That's what threw me for sure.
Okay. Third one is, Florida man attempted to pay for his fast food with a bag of marijuana.
Got to be true. That has to be.
It's true. It's true. The next one is, Florida man was arrested for trying to carjack a police cruiser while officers were inside.
I'm just going to go true on all of them now. Like, it's got to have happened, right?
I had to give you one false. Sorry, that one was false. I knew I could get you somewhere in there. The last one is, a Florida man was arrested for trying to trade his pet python for beer.
I totally believe that one.
100%. Absolutely true.
Got to be South Florida, right?
I'm sure. Yeah, so thank you for playing that. I hope you had fun with that.
I love the fact that I got 2 wrong. I mean,
that
tells more about the state of Florida because you just never know.
It really
You
does.
do never
Yeah.
know. You really don't ever know.
You're still a sunshine sage, and we are so thankful that you came on. Is there anything else you want us to know going into this season or about you, the show, anything?
No, there's really not. I just hope people really just enjoy listening to it. I don't know if enjoy is the right word sometimes because it's emotional and you're going to feel stuff in this. And like sometimes the people are like, boy, do I really want to? But I'm finding out the answer is yes, because people are like messaging me like, did the whole season in like the same day. So I'm not expecting that. But no, I just think, listen to it, keep an open mind and I think enjoy the people and especially Leo.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a total delight. Our listeners are going to love this, and just so thankful you came on to talk to us.